Hello, my name is Solange and I'm joined by Laura today to talk about how investors use the TPI data into index construction and passive investing. Laura, thank you for being here. The Church of England Pension Board has been a pioneer in tackling climate change as a financial risk and a societal issue. In 2020, the pension boards allocated funds to track the FTSE TPI Climate Transition Index, which supports the transition to a low-carbon economy. Tell me, how does the pension board utilize the FTSE TPI Climate Transition Index and its underlying data?
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. So the reason that we use the TPI FTSE Climate Transition Index is because we believe that the response to climate change needs to be systemic and account for the complexity of that transition. And the reason that we really like the index and started using it back in 2020 is because it's quite unusual in that it incorporates forward-looking data. And what I mean by that is it doesn't just look at how a company is managing climate risk today and how their emissions profile plays out today. It also looks at a whole range of what we would consider to be forward-looking indicators. So things like how a company is managing the governance of climate risks and how the board is thinking about it, but also critically how a company is setting out its transition plan, so looking at things like emissions reduction targets. And what we want to see in our portfolio is to have a stronger representation of companies that are really managing climate risk well and thoughtfully on a sector level, and so that's really what the index allows us to do. So effectively what we have is an index that's overweighted with companies that are managing that climate risk really, really well and thoughtfully for their sector, and it's underweighting companies that aren't managing it as well.
Okay, and how does this approach support the pension board's investment objectives?
It's a good question. So there's a couple of ways. I would say one is we obviously have a net zero 2050 target. We also have a climate action plan. So part of our target is to reduce emissions, financed emissions over time. So this really helps support that. And we've been able to exceed our year-on-year financed emissions targets based on the target that we've set for our public equity portfolio through using the index. But the second part is we're really focused on stewardship. We really believe that the biggest role that we can play as investors is to help shape companies' responses to climate change to reduce emissions as quickly as possible and to make those companies more robust, which will help the economy be more robust into the long term. And so we use stewardship as a feedback loop where we're able to kind of sit down with a company that might be perhaps underweight in the portfolio because their climate plan hasn't been as well advanced or matured, and sit down with them, provide the feedback on the things that we would like to see. Perhaps it's better governance, perhaps it's more ambitious emissions reduction targets, and then hopefully that gets translated into better plans from those companies that then may be more strongly represented in the index. So it feels like there's a real feedback loop. And we also use things like voting, collaborative engagement and other parts of our stewardship plan to help support those objectives. Fascinating.
It would be very interesting to hear your views about what's the next evolution of climate investing. And in particular, what do you see as the data that you need to inform your climate investment strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there's a couple of different things. One is I think we're seeing a lot of interest from investors in increasing their exposure to green revenues and climate solutions. And I know that FTSE has done a lot of work looking at that issue. So I think that having data to support those objectives is going to be really critical. And the second thing I think is when you're looking at kind of issuers across a public equity portfolio, I think we're going to be increasingly looking for jurisdiction and sector-specific data, because fundamentally what we're wanting to see from issuers that we're invested in is to understand that they're actually managing climate risk in the most robust way that they can for their sort of geography, for their sector within the policy settings that they're sitting in, but also among their peers. So whether that's the mining sector, the oil and gas sector, whoever you're talking to. So really, I think it's going to be about having really specific pathways and really specific data that helps us to assess that in a credible way.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for watching, and please check other videos of this series and visit the TPI website for more information.